You're listening to the Moth of Glen Mailey. Glen Mailey was an old municipality 10 miles outside of town proper. A drowsy place where life took its time, moving only as fast as the river that ran through it. Grandmother Shannon lived there with her ancient cat, tucked away on the outskirts of the hamlet. Her front yard was the forest, she liked to say, and the only thing that separated her home from the rambling woods was a short clearing cut through by the river that carried water into the larger city downstream. The older townsfolk who still lived in Glen Mailey had a tradition: never cross the river into the woods beyond. Over the years, the tradition lost its definition, a fading inscription carved on overgrown stone, just like the kudzu that cascaded over the old abandoned homes, forgotten cemeteries. Anyone who could remember had long forgotten why they felt a chill sense of dread when they looked across the river to the twisted lace of the forest beyond. But living this close to the woods never seemed to bother Gran. Even the other townsfolk, though they seemed disapproving of the forest itself, did not seem to cast the same disapproval on her grandmother. They spoke of her in quietly respectful tones, as if she hung on every blade of grass. It would be difficult to describe in detail that Grandmother Shannon was an integral part of the order in town, but Orla always remembered her being treated that way. Whenever she ran into town on an errand or delivered a letter from her grandmother, they'd stop and stare at her for a moment, like she was a June bug in the sun, pulling them into some distant memory of a summer long past. "You Shannon's granddaughter?" It was a question she was used to receiving when she pulled into town. It was strange to receive it from someone so young, however. Orla blinked at the gas station attendant as she pulled out her crumpled cash to pay. He made a looping gesture towards her face from across the counter. "It's just, you sort of look like her. Your hair, too. It's curly like hers. Don't see that around here often." "Yeah, I get that sometimes." She gave him a tired smile and waited for her change. He handed it to her and smiled back. "You looking after her house while she's gone?" Orla nodded, reminding herself that everyone tended to mind everyone else's business in a town this small. She found it heartening that her grandma talked to people when she traveled into town these days. And the cat. Lord knows the cat takes care of herself. She stuffed the change away and pocketed her wallet. "Oh well, it'll be good to have someone looking after the place while she's away." Orla noticed that there was a soft look of relief on his face, and she felt a slight sense of dis-ease when she couldn't place why. "Of course." "Hey, you used to spend summers there, I remember," he said suddenly as she readied herself to leave. Orla paused as she slid her sunglasses back on. "Yeah, that's right." "You ever see anything up by the cabin?" he said, eyes going wide. "See anything?" she said, wondering if she wasn't getting the joke. "You know," he said vaguely. "Weird stuff in the woods." Orla felt the hairs on her arm prickle. Her fingers gave an unintended squeeze on her grip around the keys. "What do you mean, like animals? Ghosts?" She tried to laugh it off. People were superstitious, and although it had been a century since the last wolves came prowling through the night in frontier towns, the fear of the unknown among the wild trees still existed. Something shifted in the boy's face as he blinked, and then readjusted, as if suddenly realizing he'd addressed the wrong audience. "Sorry, forget it. I've been listening to too many podcasts." She gave him an empathetic laugh, looking around the lifeless store. "It definitely helps to pass the time." He nodded, but his nervous look failed to leave his face. "Have a safe night," he said, more like a blessing than a goodbye. Thanks for listening. The miniseries returns with Part 2 on October 5th, and then again on October 10th with Part 3. Can't wait to see you there, and whatever you do, don't cross the river into the woods.